The longest non-stop flight in the world lasts just over 19 hours. That's almost 24 hours from takeoff to landing. That's hefty, but that's nothing compared to a flight that lasted 37 years. This is Infinity, and in this episode, I'll tell you about the missing plane that landed 37 years after takeoff. On July 2, 1955, Pan American Airways passenger aircraft performed Flight 914. It took off from New York and was scheduled to land in Miami at 9:55. There were 61 people on board, 57 passengers and 4 crew members. A seemingly usual U.S. flight, right? What could have gone wrong? At first, the flight was normal, but soon the pilots stopped communicating, and the dispatchers who were monitoring the flight found that the airliner suddenly disappeared from the radar. No one was able to contact the plane. Because the flight's route was partially over the Atlantic Ocean, aviation officials assumed that the plane had crashed over water and sunk. Rescue operations and activities were organized. Searchers searched the supposed crash areas but found absolutely nothing. There was not a single clue, not a single wreckage. The plane seemed to have vanished into thin air. When it became clear that the search would yield no results, the airliner and everyone on board were declared missing. As is usually the case, the incident was soon forgotten, but it was remembered 37 years later. In 1992, Juan de la Corte, a dispatcher at Venezuela's Caracas airport, saw an unidentified object on the radar. It soon became clear to him a suspiciously old aircraft was flying to Caracas. Juan de la Corte contacted the pilot of the plane and found out it was Flight 914. The dispatcher radioed that the plane was off course, flying to Venezuela instead of Miami, and told the pilot the current date, May 21, 1992. Everyone was shocked. Instead of an intelligible answer from the pilot, Juan de la Corte heard yelling and cursing, and the dispatcher finally realized that the very plane that had mysteriously disappeared almost 40 years earlier was on its way. A landing strip was quickly prepared for the airliner. The airliner landed safely, and the airport staff rushed to it. Eyewitnesses reported that the passengers staring out the windows were scared, and the first pilot was in no hurry to make contact. Instead, he gestured for them to be left alone, and a few minutes later the plane took off and disappeared into the clouds as if nothing had happened. Several fighters of the Venezuelan Air Force tried to track the mysterious aircraft, but the plane disappeared again. It was not visible or on radar. After some time, the airliner did make it to Miami, where it landed at the international airport, ending a flight that began nearly 38 years ago. None of the crew or passengers aged. None of them could give coherent answers when questioned about the flight. All this makes the story of Flight 914 one of the strangest aviation mysteries of all time. But what really happened? There is no definitive answer to these questions. People are still putting forward theories about the accident, including mystical theories. Some people believe that the plane got caught in a time loop from which it took a long time to get out, or in a time portal, thanks to which it instantly traveled through time. Some people believe that aliens are to blame, and some believe that the Bermuda Triangle, which was crossed by the pilot during the flight, is to blame. Does this mean that the whole story is true, and the plane was really missing somewhere for almost 40 years? Or is it fiction after all? Write in the comments what you think about it, and stay tuned because there are other, no less mystical, creepy, and mysterious airplane disappearances further in the episode. They'll make you feel uncomfortable. Malaysia Boeing. Let's start with the most famous plane disappearance of recent years, which many of you have definitely heard about. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines plane performed Flight 370 from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing. This flight is not to be confused with Flight MH17 of the same year. 40 minutes after takeoff, communication with the airliner was lost, and it disappeared without a trace. The last time it showed up on radar was 225 kilometers southwest of the southern province of Vietnam. A huge search operation has been launched over a vast area of the Indian Ocean, the area where the Boeing is suspected to have crashed. The search for the missing Boeing is currently the largest in aviation history, both in terms of cost and the number of forces and countries involved. But despite this, the search has yielded virtually no results. Regardless of the search, only a few pieces of wreckage were found. The passengers and crew were declared dead in an accident, and the exact cause of the plane's disappearance has not been determined. Maybe the Boeing really did crash into the ocean. And given how big the ocean is, finding it would be impossible. Or maybe the plane crashed onto some mysterious island, like in Lost, and the passengers now live there and there's no way to get out. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart is remembered as the first woman pilot in history to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and as the woman pilot who went missing and gave the world one of the most mystical mysteries in aviation history. In 1937, she started her round-the-world tour but never finished it. On July 2, 1937, Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, disappeared near Howland Island in the Central Pacific. Shortly thereafter, the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard launched a massive search operation in the area. But neither Amelia and Fred nor Earhart's Lockheed Model 10 Electra aircraft were found. It's still unknown what became of the pilot, the navigator, and the plane. One theory is that Amelia's plane crashed while attempting an emergency landing on the water. Another version is that Amelia and Fred landed on another island which was uninhabited and lived there in isolation. The third version is that Amelia faked her disappearance, returned back to the United States, changed her name, and lived a quiet life until old age. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. Another interesting episode is related to the disappearance of another Lockheed aircraft. On March 16, 1962, the U.S. military set a course for Flight 739 for the Lockheed L-1049 plane. 2 hours into the flight, something happened and the plane disappeared without a trace. Prior to that, the first pilot unreasonably requested additional altitude gain, and then interference appeared on the air. Presumably, the crew tried to reach out but was not heard by the dispatcher. Soon the radio signal faded. No wreckage or bodies were found. All passengers and crew members were reported missing. Like the Malaysia Boeing, the Lockheed L-1049 plane went down somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, but it too could not be found despite an extensive search and rescue operation. The exact cause of the crash has not yet been determined. The disappearance of DC-4. All of you know about the Bermuda Triangle, but few know that similar anomalous zones exist in other places around the world. One of them is in Alaska. The Alaska Triangle is, one might say, the brother of the Bermuda Triangle, because mysterious disappearances also occur here. The disappearance of the DC-4 is just one of these incidents. On July 21, 1951, the plane took off from Vancouver. The first hour and a half of the flight went as planned. The aircraft flew as scheduled, but then it got into bad weather. Cold rain took the pilots by surprise, and visibility dropped dramatically. This was the last information the pilots had time to relay. Sometime after this dispatch, the plane stopped communicating and disappeared without a trace, somewhere in Alaska. Despite a massive search lasting several months, no wreckage of the plane was found. No bodies were found either. It's not known exactly what happened to the plane, but many people are sure it was taken by the Alaska Triangle, in which, according to statistics, over 16,000 people have disappeared without a trace over the entire time. Flight 19. And what about the Bermuda Triangle? I've already said that the plane that landed 37 years after takeoff could have passed through the Bermuda Triangle, but that this particular area of the Atlantic is responsible for such a time phenomenon. But there's more to say about the Bermuda Triangle. It's blamed for one of the most mysterious plane disappearances in history. Or, more precisely, the disappearance of several planes at once. On December 5, 1945, Flight 19, 5 torpedo bombers, flew out of the U.S. Navy base in Florida. It was supposed to be an ordinary training flight that day, nothing special, except that the pilots had chosen a cursed spot. The flight took place on the border of the Bermuda Triangle. Sometime after the training began, the commander of Flight 19 reported that his indicators were not working and that he was lost in space. After some more time, he ordered the other pilots to eject as the bombers were running out of fuel. After that, neither the pilots nor the torpedo bombers were seen. But it's not the only thing that's surprising. A rescue plane went in search of Flight 19, but it was gone too. This happens rarely. Subsequently, other planes and vessels went to search for Flight 19 and the rescue plane, but they were unable to find anything. This disappearance is still one of the most mystical in history. To this day, it's unclear exactly what happened on that December day. That's all, guys. Where do you think the missing planes go? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and see you later.